So we'll have that conversation necessary for us to continue that. Now we're going to segue to another one. And our guest is here. Umulkher Harun is a nominated member of parliament, and she joins us this morning at this hour. Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And how are you?
Very well.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
Well, we're glad to have you here finally. So for the few minutes that we have left in this conversation, we would like to first of all welcome you and have you tell us what you think about a proverb that Dennis is going to share from Comoros.
A proverb today comes from the island of Comoros, and it says, "The sun does not forget a village just because it is small." The sun does not forget a village just because it is small. How would you
I like that? I think it goes very well with whatever discussions we're about to have today. I mean, it doesn't choose where to shine, whether you're small or a big village. You're still equal at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about equality. And of course, there have been a number of conversations over the last couple of weeks, and they've gotten actually quite ugly. They've gotten quite sticky in terms of who is a Kenyan and who should be respected as a Kenyan or held sovereign as a Kenyan. And there have been divides. And we can just go right into it and say truthfully that there have been questions about who the Kenyan Somali is, or whether they're Kenyans or whether they're masquerading as Kenyans, and it has brought a lot of vitriol, especially over the internet, amongst people who are saying, actually, no, they don't belong. Others are saying, well, we are Kenyans just like the rest.
Yeah.
Where's all of this coming from? And why is it important that we look into it?
Normally, when I introduce myself, I don't tell people I'm a Kenyan Somali. I just tell them I'm Kenyan. Then when they ask me, I tell them I'm Kenyan and I come from the Somali community. And that's because I think we all had a subject called... I think some people did GHC. I don't know. We did social studies. We were taught all the communities that live in this country. And for whatever reason, there is a very high level of ignorance. It could be deliberate ignorance. It could be because it's a narrative that has to be driven. But it shocks me when people start questioning, who is this person? Are you a Kenyan Somali, or are you Somalian from Somalia? You know, but I kind of understand where the whole discussion is coming from. And I try to look at everything historically and try to contextualize it historically. We come from a clan or a community that has been sidelined for a very long time, and I love the Constitution. It really brought everybody to the same level, sort of like the sun that shines in that small village. The Constitution allowed everybody to have a platform. Even that smallest community is recognized. And what that does is it gives you the platform to thrive. And we've had, I think, everything boils down to political goodwill. And we have regimes that have been very deliberate in sidelining these small communities. So when the Constitution came, it had to protect everybody regardless of where they come from. So we had something called the Equalization Fund that allows funds to go down to the smallest places. It had the 47 affirmative seats where representation came from all those clans that were never seen before. And I think slowly things started changing. You would see these small communities holding positions in government here and there. But the boil up and what we are seeing now is probably a regime that has made deliberate efforts to recognize and, choose to work with this particular group of people. And I think that's what's causing all this tension. Then we had the Somali, our neighboring country, in 1991 when their country collapsed and we had to host a lot of refugees in our country, and most of them settled or were put in Garissa County, Turkana County at that time.
Folks who settled from Somalia?
Yes. Yeah.
After the conflict,
there was an arrangement with the Kenyan government, and we set up the refugee camps. And how do you identify Umi, who's a Kenyan, and Umi, who is a refugee? So if you decide to use your eyes to decide if this is a Kenyan citizen, that would be very hard for you. But we have the national ID cards, we have our documentations. But I think it all comes down to resources. How are resources being shared? Before, the political goodwill was not there to support and work with these communities. And here is a regime that has given us the platform. So you would see a docket like NIS being headed by a Somali, or you would see a docket like EACC being headed by like a Somali.
As we are seeing now.
As we are seeing now.
Yes.
And it's not because the president decided to appoint his friends. I think these are people with institutional memory. If you look at the biography of somebody like CEO Abdi Amas, he comes from my clan, so I would know how far he's come through the ranks. He was a police officer, joined the system, grew through the ranks. What would happen in previous regimes, and this is when I talked about political goodwill, is they would appoint an external person because they work or they favor that particular. But this is a regime that has decided, you know what, we work with somebody who has institutional memory. And then suddenly the uproar is, why are we putting Somalis everywhere? But why would you not say the same thing when there were other clans holding the same positions? And I don't like to make this example, but look at whoever headed NSIS before, who headed the DCI before. You would never hear the conversation of why is this clan holding the same position? But now suddenly it's because a community that was never seen in the limelight is now taking over everything. The discussion now changes. And when you find a discussion that has no substance, it comes down to petty things. So this is a conversation of people talking about things simply because it fits the narrative at that time. And I think that's why we are seeing why we are seeing. You wouldn't find intellectuals or professionals having such discussions. Sometimes it's just, it's the exciting thing to talk about. And if it works with the narrative, go with it. But at the end of the day, my message always remains, Kenya is bigger than this tribal messaging. Kenya has a long way to go. We didn't fight for our constitution. We didn't shed blood just so that we can come and point out and say, why is this person holding this position? It beats logic. The entire reason we have the constitution is to allow everybody to come to the platform. And when we get to the platform, I wouldn't have any issue with Turkana getting that same position. I like that IEBC has completely changed. I mean, who is the chair for IEBC as we speak? Those are things that were never happening before. So political goodwill is also a good way to hold and uphold whatever the constitution has envisioned, and I like the direction that it's taking. So the rest, just petty narratives, to be honest. I actually don't like dwelling in such arguments.
So why do we talk about it?
Because it's something that...
Are we saying it's not important that people feel a certain type of way? It doesn't matter who it is.
But who is talking about it? That's my point. Who is talking about it?
So you're saying the who that's talking about it matters or doesn't matter in this case? That if it's not somebody who's a mover or shaker, that if they do have an opinion about a certain thing, that if they're not an influencer in terms of government, that it doesn't matter what their opinion is?
The Kenyans' opinions keeps changing, and if you look at our data usage as a country, we are one of the highest countries that are chronically online. And online conversations keep changing. If it is a conversation that sparks or that is trending, you would find a lot of discussions moving in that direction. But is it important that what we are talking about is leading us to that direction, or is it going to divide the country? So where you base your arguments and look at the outcomes at the end of the day matters. For me, it's not bringing anything important to the table. It's not bringing the country together. It's just vilifying and targeting a certain group of people, and because of that, I don't pay attention to it. You would never find me online fighting back or defending my position because somebody called me a refugee. I just brush it off, and because at the end of the day, I know I have my identity. I know I'm as Kenyan as we could be, so why do I have to feed into that conversation? But any other thing that matters, that is what we need to focus on. So for me, my point or my message at the end of the day is, I don't think it's something that we need to dwell on to a point where, and I keep saying this, media shapes a lot of narratives. If the media picks up a discussion around that, Are you feeding into the conversation? Are you helping it? You get my point? And a lot of times you would find the tabloids or the small blogs picking up a hateful comment and it spreads. But what message are we putting out there? So
there is the subject of equality in the country, and one would look at, let's take the northern part of the country, for example. A part of the country that has been marginalized for a very long time. And President William Ruto comes in and let's make it easy for everybody to access ID. That is a part of conversation that has never been there for a long time. But that notwithstanding, you would also find conversations that do take place, in the sense that we have recently Kenyan, Somali. What the hell is that? That's the question that I even struggle myself, because if you're Kenyan, you're Kenyan.
That is it.
But where is this coming from? Do people from the north that border Somalia feel Somalia is home or Kenya is home? Because that is pretty much what everyone wants to understand.
Let me explain this in a very, because I've tried to break it down as much as I could. We need to think thematically more than we need to look at things episodically. And this brings me back to the online narrative.
Yes.
What is driven online? Is it something that could trend? For example, if today we have a crazy innovation and at the same time the president has appointed an El Molo person, what conversation would trend? You get my point? And I think it again boils down to, there's this what is it called, data farming and engagements, and it would trend more to discuss these things because again everything has been monetized. So whatever catches the headlines, whatever catches the blogs, that's where our energy goes into. And I think it boils down, it brings down our thinking and our what is it called, how we reason as a country. I stopped using Twitter. There was a time Twitter used to be where you would get, that tangible conversation. But nowadays I look at it and I just think, no, I don't think I want to expose myself to this because it keeps killing your thinking capacity. You find conversations that are not really healthy. So you just shut off.
Indeed.
So that is how things are looked at episodically. It is trending. Let's hit
go with
it.
it.
But I mentioned political goodwill. You remember Wagala massacre, I think. And I read a comment that said, now I know why Moi put these people in a camp and killed them. Do you know how that would feel if you are somebody who comes from that region, for example? And I'm thinking, is this what I really want? And I don't take the assumption that this is the thinking of every other Kenyan. I just know this is this individual's thinking, not bold enough to use their actual account, but hide behind a pseudo and spread this narrative because that feeds into it.
And I think, Umi, that's the issue.
That's the issue
with what you said. And if we can look at it in this manner, whereby we can't ignore the problem away, or we can't run away from the problem, and by the time you hear people speaking in the manner that they do.
But why are they speaking
just
now?
Hang on.
Now.
That there is... No, it's not just now. People have been speaking for a very long time.
Since when?
So by the time somebody is speaking out, this is an outward expression of an inward rumbling that is happening. So we can't water it down and have people just say, well, I'm going to stay off Twitter or I'm not going to pay attention to it.
But what do you do?
So the examples that you had given before about previously where a certain tribe of people had been hired, it was an issue for people. It was wrong then. Today, it is not right either, as somebody has just told me this morning. So then there was an issue, there's still a problem. Now it just happens to be somebody else. We can't ignore away the problem or stay away from the arena where it's being discussed. Because guess what? Whether there is an episode today or there's an episode next year, the internal rumblings will still come to the fore. So how about we deal with the issue?
But how do you deal with?
That's why we have this conversation. How do we deal with the issues?
What I've tried to explain is give a breakdown of exactly what guides us as a country. We are not guided by emotions. We are not guided by individual whims. We're guided by a document called the Constitution of Kenya.
We should be guided by the Constitution.
Ideally. And I think things move the way they do because we have this guiding document that tells you have all these particular, including the Indians,
Asians.
The Asian community are actually part of the Kenyan community. That's the thing. And I think some time back, I don't know what contest was happening, and the winner ended up being a Kenyan of Asian descent. And somebody in the comments said, we don't have enough Kenyans. Why are we being represented by Indians? So my question is, don't we acknowledge that we have other communities that exist amongst us as a country? We are over 44 tribes, I think. We are a big country that is very diverse. And political goodwills are why changes happen, because the Constitution cannot be implemented without the goodwill of the political class. And it is us to practice nationalism. It is us to practice good messaging so that wherever we do or however we carry ourselves as the political leaders of this country, we are bringing people together and we are bringing the message of unity. If, as a politician, I take a platform and say, why are you doing this? Is it because you come from this clan? I'm not bringing the right attitude to this kind of conversations, because politics is very emotive. The same way tribe is very emotive. The same way land issues are emotive. And how we handle such matters decides what we can and can't do. Look at the history of Rwanda, for example. Look at the xenophobic attacks in South Africa. Because the political leadership feeds into these conversations. Where I come from and where I sit as two things, as a person who comes from the northern community and as a leader, I don't like to entertain this conversation. What I try to do is educate people. Look, we've had challenges. For example, I took 2 years to achieve my ID. Do you know why it took me this long to achieve my ID? Because I had to prove to people that I'm actually Kenyan. And once you try to educate people in that manner, without feeding into the narrative or without being very emotional and saying, if you call me this and I call you that, we are not helping. And that's why I said on Twitter, whenever I get these hateful comments, I just shut off, because I'd rather give you the platform to understand what's happening as a country. Historically, we've had Wagala massacre during, I think, the Moise regime. We've had the Garissa massacre during the Moise regime as well. We've had the rounding up of Somalis in, I think, Kasarani during Uhuru's regime. All this was led by knee-jerk reactions. These Somalis, these Somalis, these Somalis. You get my point? We have communities that also come from the border areas. Do you ever hear of a Maasai saying, I'm a Kenyan Maasai? But you see, Maasais are found in Tanzania, they are found in Kenya. Somalis are found in Somalia, they are found in Djibouti, they are found in Ethiopia, they are found in Kenya. Why do we have to identify ourselves as a Kenyan Somali?
Let me ask you a question that's coming from folks, because like you said, some things are episodic, but in this case, they're not episodic. They are latent in the minds of people, right? So it's not one thing that brought it about. That we see trends over time, whether you want to talk about certain things like the appointments of people in key positions, whether you want to talk about the commercial business angle of things, where we've seen that huge influx of this kind of business in certain parts, especially in the capital.
Remind me to make a comment on that.
You will in just a minute. Even when there has been things like equalization that took part in other parts of the country, why the insistence from this particular community into many parts of the business commercial districts of Nairobi. All right. And that the overall imagined thought is that whereby you may hold one may hold a Kenyan ID, that the allegiance is still with Somalia. These are the thoughts. They are not they've not been brought about by AI. It's not a robot. These are blood thumping human beings who have this thinking in their minds. How would you comment on that?
Again, I come back to the same comment of who exactly is a Kenyan and who is not. I, as a Kenyan, know for a fact that I don't need to prove my identity to anybody. I think recently what sparked this debate was the young boys who were stamping on the Kenyan flag. That really infuriated me a lot, because I would fight for my country anytime. I would really protect the interests of my country. So seeing that, again, boils down to how many people do we have in this country who are not Kenyan? During the football games that were happening, you would find every country would have their people in the what is it called? I think the Madagascar game had people from the country. The same way the Somali fans had their people coming to the pitch. If this is a Somali who offended our flag as a Kenyan, why balkanize the blame and put it into one and say these Somalis are not loyal? The Kenyan Somalis were there fighting, representing, cheering their country. The same way the Somali nationals were cheering their country. My argument is the balkanization is because there is a general assumption that every Somali who lives in this country is not a Kenyan. And that is my point. This is a challenge that has existed. Why we are as loud or as visible as we are now is just, the fact that we have the platform to thrive. Like I said, political goodwill never existed. But as a culture, and this is how we move as a Somali people, if I have whatever little resources I have today, we pull resources through marriage, we pull resources through our big families that we have. I mean, even from how we eat, we don't eat from separate plates. We eat through a senior. That's because the culture has ingrained us to move together. You would find, if I am able to get this platform, I would pull up a sibling of mine. And pulling of resources, we don't rely very much on banks. And if you look at the business community that exists today, first, they even have a business community where anybody who enters that platform registers with that community. Quick loans are accessible. Quick support is accessible. How you pull resources makes you move a bit faster. And I liked some time back, there was a gentleman who was explaining how the Somalis do their businesses. Why we are bold and we are visible now is because we've reached a time where our resources are more than enough to be able to pull us up as a community. But it boils down to, the conversation again goes back to, this is the money that has come from northeastern Kenya. Northeastern is not the only county that is corrupt. We have very many corrupt counties or scandals that have happened. But why is it that everything that happens triggers back to huyu ni Mkenya ama huyu ni wetu? That is what I'm trying to fight. I'm trying to tell my fellow countrymen that we exist as a community, just like they exist through their communities. It shouldn't be that we have to feed this monster, because what do we do at the end of the day? We lose a big chunk of our resources. 82% of this land belongs to the so-called smaller communities. These are people we need to work with. We have grown as a country. The Constitution has given us that platform. After devolution, a lot of resources has gone down to that small community, that small village. And anybody who gets whatever little amount of resources, whether they get it through fraudulent means or through pulling resources together, at least something has changed. And that's why things are moving the way they are moving. Add on to the political goodwill that's happening. The thought should not be that this clan is benefiting. The conversation should shift to how exactly do we promote nationality without vilifying anybody. And I think that's what I really want to emphasize on this interview, that historically marginalization has happened, but after 2010, a bit of independence has been achieved. Whatever goodwill that comes with whatever regime, it could be another president that can come and say, you know what, we would be able to make this appointment in this manner. Yes, it has happened before. I agree with that, that when a section of people were benefiting, the rumblings were there. But what is really adding on to the pressures now is the toxic conversation because digital presence exists now. We have the internet where these conversations are now happening. Kitambo, it used to be radio. You will not find somebody coming to radio to spew hate. But we are in the era of digital media where everybody has a platform, everybody is a journalist, everybody can share their media. My message is, let's use our online tools in a right manner that brings a country together without, bring all these divisions.
What you're saying, and I hear you, and the unfortunate thing is this conversation will never end, not even in the near future. Mm-hmm. The reason is there is a very layered historical issues, right from governance to security. I've been to Somalia several times.
Yeah.
I've gone to the Dadaab refugee camp a few times. I've gone through Garissa, making my way there a few times. The realities are, and I've covered stories where you will find illegal or Somalis who are crossing the border from Somalia through the refugee camps to Isli, Nairobi, and other parts of the country illegally, ended up acquiring identity cards through corrupt means. It's a fact.
Yeah.
So then you get to a point where the conversation then is, okay, are you Kenyan because you have an identity card which was acquired illegally? And therefore, are you Somali, or are you Kenyan Somali? And the reason I said this, the history is so layered, is if we go back very, very quickly, looking at, because you've mentioned Wagala massacre, before that massacre actually, you're looking at a time, and this was before even colonization, before the British even came to this country.
Yeah.
I've read my history, and where Somalis then, the indigenous presence of Somalis in northern Kenya was as a result of migration, because Somalis were essentially pastoralists. So you're moving through, you said Ethiopia, Djibouti, and all these other countries, the northern part of the country, and the migration was very, very open. Then the 1952, I think, is when we started having the boundaries. We didn't draw these boundaries ourselves. So by the time the boundaries are being drawn, then you have the Northern Frontier District that then had the Somalis, the Somalis there. But where the issue then comes in, you remember the Shifter War?
Yeah.
So where you have the Shifter War is where now, after Kenya's independence, Somalis are feeling, you know what, let's push to join our Somali Republic. Let's secede from Kenya. And that created that belt. And the problem started now, the allegiance, okay, so where you're within the Kenyan border, but you want to secede from Kenya because you want to go back to Somalia. And the Shifter War escalated. You're shaking your head.
I disagree with that narrative.
Okay.
Totally.
You're disagreeing with history, or you disagree
No. I disagree because, history depends on who's sharing that history. If we argue from the basis of migration, everybody migrated from somewhere, including a country like the United States of America. Nobody owns that land. Somebody came from somewhere, settled there. So before the borders were drawn, and I think in history they used to call that the sphere of influence, where the colonialist would lay and say this belongs to this, whatever. Somalia actually was under the colonization of the Italians. We were under the colony of the British. The borders were only drawn, but that didn't mean the communities didn't live here before. The war happened if you look at the history. I totally
agree with you. I'm referring to the Shifter War.
The Shifter War was in the 90s. Somali people were in Northeastern.
Why was there a Shifter War?
It had nothing to do with us wanting to secede. It was the historical injustices that were happening. You could not move anywhere without the Kipanda system, where you have to show who you belong to. My grandfather had a red ID card where he had to show, whenever police would come banging on his door, to show, okay, look, I have this document. Yeah. This was way before. The Shifter War happened recently in the 90s when the Somali community came and settled in Kenya through the refugee. Do you notice there was a Shifter between 1963 and 67? Not the 90s. Okay.
63 and 67. There was a Shifter War. And the Shifter War, and this is history.
Yeah. No, I agree with that, but it depends on how you want to use that history. Every community immigrated into this country. Kenya has many diverse people. If we go through that argument, and I don't want to make my comments in that angle, everybody came from somewhere. But we are a country that have different clans, and we are diverse in that angle. Historically, I think they would tell you we were a gift from Jubaland. I think that's where you want to take the
No. Where I was taking my conversation, Uma, with all due respect, was what Ndu earlier referred to.
Yeah.
There is always this feeling that, so for example, during the protests, the people are arguing, look, okay, we're protesting, people are raising Kenyan flags, but from one community you're seeing the Somali flag, for example. There is this current Free Palestine conversation. Again, people we see predominantly around that conversation, again, are the Somalis.
The Muslims,
Somalis. And the reason I'm saying the reason I'm saying this conversation may not end is, like you said, and I agree with you, is then understanding the history of where we are coming from, the things that we had to deal with, and the things that you had to deal with, and the things that you had to endure, and what you're talking about, marginalization, for example, to the point where it took 2 years to get an ID card, is understanding where these people then coming from, separate those issues from the politics of, okay, there are people who are also in the country illegally, for example. The way we have Congolese in Kenya illegally. We have people from
many
Burundi
illegals
who are in Kenya
from different countries,
and they're doing business, and they're here illegally. You know.
You see, for me, my simple question is, as we have this conversation today, Kenyans from different communities and the Somali, how do they engage? How would you say Somali community
I would know that,
country,
by the way.
in the country engage with the other Kenyans from other communities?
Yeah, let me be honest with you, and let me just tell you what exactly happens. Forget Wajir County, forget Mandera County, Garissa County. We had, I think, the attack that happened in 2015 at Garissa University, which was very unfortunate, and immediately that attack happened, I remember I was traveling to Nairobi a few weeks after, and I was stopped 5 times between Garissa to Nairobi. Before you cross to Nairobi, we have the Tana River Bridge, which then shows you've crossed to the other side of your county. As soon as we started moving, we had roadblocks in every stop, and they kept asking me, and picture this, it's a public transport. I was traveling with a non-Somali person, and I had to alight the bus, show my ID. They would even mulika it like this, and then mulika my thumb to check if it is actually real. And I was a serious activist. I think I still am. And I asked the officer, why are you not checking his document? And he said, "Huyu ni Mkenya." That's a police officer, somebody who's been trained to understand that, we have different and you see, these are things that have fed into the narrative over time and over time. The challenge is because we host the refugee community. Essentially, everything boils down to nationalism. Okay. I, as a leader, must be proud of my country. If I am that person who's appointed as a chief, need to be proud of his country and protect his or her country. If I am a police officer, I need to protect my country. The conversation should not be about how would an illegal acquire a document. It is not me, the Somali person, giving them the document.
But this is the thing, and
it is a system.
Let's feed into that, because this is the thing about stereotype, the thing about prejudice, and also to an extent, to a very large extent, is that it is based on an element, no matter how thin, of some kind of truth. All right?
Yeah.
That if I have formed a narrative in my head, just like you said, it has come from somewhere.
Yeah.
With the examples that he's given, that there have been people who have come into Kenya who are Somali and have gotten IDs in an illegal manner and have come into the capital city and have built businesses.
Just like other illegals.
Allow me to finish. And have continued to build business from that. So if we were talking about other illegals in Burundi, then that would be the conversation. Today, we are talking about the Somali perspective, which has also been the topic of some friction in the last few days. All right? Now, these stereotypes, this prejudice, as is normal is built on an element of truth. It has come from somewhere. And the way to deal with it is to deal with that somewhere. That has it happened? Yes, to accept that it has happened. So how do you deal with it today if there are not people who are still fueling that by current? This thing of buying IDs is not history. It is present. This corruption that you're speaking of happens today.
But again, whose fault is it? It's not the fault.
I don't think you can put it on one person.
No. It's us. Hear my argument, please. I'm saying, if we are fighting illegal people coming into our country, first let's eliminate the assumption that every Somali is illegal.
Which was my point. That prejudice is built on an element of truth. It is not universal in nature.
Let's start there. The same way we have any other illegals in the country, we could have, at the end of the day, we are Africans and every land belongs to us. But for us to protect our identities, we live through the countries that we live in. Eventually, people move, people intermarry. Somalis are the point of focus because they have become so bold, I think, in whatever spheres they work in or they operate in. My argument comes down to, we have one common agenda to fight as a country, not focusing on whichever tribe, whichever whatever. If we have weakened systems, if we continue offending our constitution, we will have all sorts of problems. It all boils down to how patriotic you are as a person. I, as a leader, have to be patriotic. When I come to media, as a staff or as a media person or whichever position I hold, I need to stay patriotic. The messaging, the way we place our words, the way we speak about issues should be a manner that promotes nationalism. If we don't, then things become, disorganized, and we lose the whole point of why we need to build our country together. The point comes down to corruption. Do we have illegals who've acquired IDs? Yes. But is it their fault? We need to blame ourselves as a country.
Yeah, this is obviously a conversation
it comes down to a corruption issue.
Okay.
But we don't need to go on the offense. And putting the Somali community on the spotlight. Everybody earns their positions or whatever they do because they deserve it. They are allowed to be there. If we have any other clan that comes to the limelight, like the Somali community, we will not go back to this conversation of saying, where have these people come from? No, they belong. And that's what we need to feed into. And my advice and my guidance, especially to media, when the narrative takes this angle, let's take the time to educate the public on what is important. Otherwise, I don't like where this conversation is going, honestly. It beats logic to even... Anyway.
Obviously a conversation that needs more time to then be able to. We should have started this show with us that we started at 7. We will obviously look to have it in a more with more time, obviously, because we can't run away from the truths. We can't run away from the truths, and that people are thinking and having those conversations for themselves. We want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. Glad to have you on the show today. Nominated Member of Parliament Umulkher Harun has been our guest this hour. Thank you for being in the Situation Room. It's 8:08. Conversations continue.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.